Hello Year 12, welcome to your next lesson. So we are done now with the cognitive approach as we've looked at how it explains gender, consumer behaviour and aggression. So now it's time to move on to the social approach and see how this explains the different behaviours, and we're starting with aggression. So that's your title, and make sure you have your pen and paper ready. So this is your starter just to get you thinking about what you've already been taught. So the biological and the learning approach you did with Mr. Martin, the cognitive one you did with me. So I want you to write down, how do the other approaches explain aggression? So I want you to pause me and make some bullet points of keywords that the cognitive, biological and learning approach use to describe aggression. Starting with the cognitive approach, what does the cognitive approach think causes aggression? So firstly, we have the idea of priming. Remember, priming is how we see something first time, and then that affects how we then react to a similar stimulus later on. So for example, if we observe hostile and aggressive behaviour in any social situation or even in a film or TV, then later we might be more likely to make a wrong interpretation of someone else's behaviour, even if that situation is completely unrelated to the one that we've observed. And we also looked at hostile attribution bias, and this is when people tend to believe that people are kind of against them and they have ulterior motives for doing the things that they do, even if it's just an accident. So if you remember, we looked at the study where the researchers told the participants of the situation where you're at a party and someone bumps into you and you spill your drink. Someone with hostile attribution bias will think that that was aggressive, and in reaction to that will act in an aggressive way towards that person. And then we have biological aggression, and there's quite a few key words for this one. So firstly, we have the evolution of aggression, and we can argue that we're aggressive because it's an adaptive behaviour, because in earlier days, those who were aggressive were most likely to reproduce because they were more likely to get resources and sexual partners. So maybe it's an adaptive behaviour that's been naturally selected because it confers reproductive advantages. Brain structures, so you've looked at the amygdala, which is a key predictor of human aggression. We know by looking at someone's amygdala using brain scans what kind of aggression they are feeling and how they are interpreting certain situations. And then we've got the orbitofrontal cortex, sorry, struggle with that one, and reduced activity in this area of the brain disrupts impulse control. So the individual cannot inhibit their aggressive behaviours. They can't stop because the OFC controls our impulses, so it makes us less likely to act aggressive. And then we've got neuroaggression. So you looked at, neurochemistry of aggression. You looked at the decreased levels of serotonin and the increased level of dopamine that cause aggression. So decreased levels of serotonin means self-control is reduced and impulsive behaviours become more frequent. But then serotonin and dopamine work together, because if we have low levels of serotonin in the brain, it means that dopamine is going to be overactive, and this causes impulsivity and aggression. So impulsivity meaning that we don't really think about what we're doing. So if something makes us angry, we might just lash out and punch something or be verbally aggressive. And then we've got genes and aggression. You looked at the MAO gene, which is responsible for producing an enzyme called MAOA. And MAOA breaks down neurotransmitters so that they can be recycled or excreted. And if the brain isn't able to do this, then we have a build-up of these neurotransmitters, which makes us more aggressive. And then learning approach, we have positive reinforcement. So like particularly variable interval reinforcement. So not getting reinforced every time you're aggressive, but just at certain points will make a person more likely to act aggressive. So rewards could include money, sex, food, social status. So if you think about like institutional aggression, like in prisons, those who are aggressive are more likely to be the ringleaders. And then we have social learning theory, which was the Bobo doll study. So this suggests that we learn how to be aggressive and how to react to being angry or angry situations by observing role models and then imitating that behavior. But it can also happen through vicarious reinforcement. So if you've seen a film where someone who was aggressive got what they wanted, then you're more likely to think that aggression is going to get you what you want. What are the two assumptions of the social approach? Now, this will seem like we did it ages ago because it was ages ago. So pause me if you need to have a think about it. Number one assumption is that of behaviour in a social context. So humans are social animals and we need people around us, and people really influence what we do. And number two is people, culture and society. So we behave in ways related to our stereotypes, related to the expectations of the culture and the society that we belong to. How might what you have learned so far about social psychology lead to people becoming aggressive? So think about the key words of the social approach, such as conformity, stereotypes, social categorization, and these aren't all of it. So you might think of more keywords from the social approach. And I want you to think about, in preparation for this lesson, how that might cause aggression. So pause me now so you can have a think about it and maybe write a few bullet points down. So today we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at how aggression is caused because of conformity to social and group norms. In particular, we're going to look at gender role norms and cultural norms. And then we're going to look at stereotypes of aggression. So what gender stereotypes are there of aggression and what racial and ethnic stereotypes are there? Conformity to social and group norms. What is a norm, first of all? Pause me if you need to think about it. A norm is an unstated rule about what behaviours are considered appropriate and inappropriate. So nobody tells us these rules when we belong to a group. We just kind of know them. So we kind of know what's appropriate to wear, how it's appropriate to behave in certain situations. Nobody's told us that. We've kind of just learnt that by being part of that group or that society. We share these rules with members of our group, so everybody kind of behaves in a similar way. Group membership depends upon accepting the group's norms. If we don't accept those group's norms, then we can be rejected by that group and we might have to find a different group. What's the term for when we change our behaviour to fit in with a group? And it's one of the key terms of the social approach. So pause me now, have a little think about it. This, of course, is conformity. And if you remember, there's three types of conformity: compliance, identification, and internalization. And all three of those describe the way that we change our behaviour in order to fit in with the majority. So I want to talk about gender role norms now. In society, which gender expresses the most anger, would you say, generally? Eagley and Wood argue that norms dictate that men should be independent and assertive and use aggression to achieve status, money, or other social rewards. Aggression is a behaviour that's kind of expected of men, because if a male isn't an alpha and doesn't exert his authority, then maybe he won't achieve the status or the money or the social rewards that he wants. So in terms of society, I feel that men are more likely to express anger than women. However, women, although especially like a few decades ago, women were kind of meant to be seen and not heard. But society has changed, and they're kind of expected to be verbally aggressive in order to have that cathartic release, to release that anger. It's part of that gender role norm that states that women should be emotionally expressive. So women shouldn't hold back their emotions, but they shouldn't do it in a physical way. They should do it in a verbal way. Is this always the case? Are men always physically aggressive and are women always verbally aggressive? No. Conformity to gender role expectations varies depending on how much a person identifies with their gender. So if a woman doesn't really feel like she is very feminine, maybe she's androgynous, she has masculine and feminist characteristics, maybe she feels like she wants to express her anger physically. And if a male, I know lots of males that aren't aggressive at all, and I guess it depends on how much you identify with that and how much you think that that is a norm for your gender. Riley et al. Found women who identify with masculine traits are more likely to be physically aggressive. Now I want to move on to cultural norms. So, which country do you think has the most recorded cases of intentional homicide? So, which country basically do you think has the highest number of murders? So, not manslaughter. It's Mexico, number one. Well done if you guessed that right. It's 18.1 per 100,000 population in Mexico, which is huge. Actually, that is a huge number of homicides. The second one is the USA, but drastically less than in Mexico. So it's 5.0 per 100,000 population in the USA. And then we've got Korea, 2.9. And then we've got 1.1 in England and Wales. And the lowest is Iceland at 0.3 per 100,000 population. This implies that there are different cultural norms about aggression. So in some cultures, it's expected of you and it's kind of accepted that people are going to be aggressive. But even within those cultures, there are different norms about aggression. So obviously not everybody in Mexico will agree that aggression is okay and will be accepting of that. So for example, in the United States, the southern states share something called culture of honor. And this is basically a cultural norm that has been adopted for a long time, and it condones aggressive responses to perceived insults. So if someone insults you, you are allowed, and in fact you are expected to act aggressively towards that if you feel like someone has insulted you. However, it's entangled with gender role norms of masculinity, and it's only men that are expected to behave in this way, to respond with violence. If women get insulted, they're not expected to lash out physically. So when disputes escalate, they dispute very quickly, and this means that there's a lot of fatal violence that arise because of this cultural norm that they're expected to act physically if someone even mildly insults them, because it's threatening their man's social status, which in terms of cultural norms, that's seen as a really negative thing. Okay, so that's that for gender role norms and cultural norms. Next, we're moving on to stereotypes and aggression. What is a stereotype? We looked at stereotypes when we first looked at the social approach. Stereotypes are cognitive shortcuts that allows us to interact with the social world. So even if you're not aware, whenever we meet someone new, the first thing we do is we label them. So this might be, for example, okay, she's a woman, that's an old person, that's a teenager. And then we think that we know things about them based on their stereotypes and based on the social category which they belong to, and based on the people that we have met before of that same social category. We assume that they're going to have similar behaviour, which obviously isn't always the case. Aggression is one example, and it commonly features as part of gender and racial ethnic stereotypes. So when we just looked at gender norms, we said that stereotypically men are more aggressive. So when we see maybe a male walking alone in the street and we see a male, we might instantly think that they're going to be aggressive. And if we saw a female, we probably wouldn't think that. And that's because of our stereotypes. Firstly, with stereotypes and aggression, I want to look at gender stereotypes. And we've already discussed this. How are men's stereotypes in terms of aggression compared to women? Men are stereotyped to be physically aggressive, whereas women are seen to be more verbally aggressive. Why might it be dangerous to uphold these sorts of gender stereotypes? I want you to pause me and have a think about that. It may lead to acceptance and tolerance of sexual harassment and IPV perpetrated by men against women. It's this tendency to, maybe not in those situations, but in some situations, you know, when boys get into fights and the phrase boys will be boys gets thrown around, it kind of makes aggression seem acceptable. When it's not, because if it was girls getting into a fight, that might be slightly different because it's not fitting with the current stereotype of aggression. And they found that these stereotypes are still very much a thing, as male cartoon characters are consistently presented as more aggressive than female characters. In fact, I can't actually think of an aggressive female character, but if you think of one, let me know. And now we're moving on to racial and ethnic stereotypes. Black people are often stereotyped as aggressive, more so than any other ethnic group. Tall black men are particularly stereotyped as threatening, whereas tall white men are perceived as competent. And already we can see how dangerous these stereotypes can be. An Ofcom report from 2018 showed that Scottish people are often portrayed as more aggressive than English, Welsh and Northern Irish people in British TV programmes. So it's not just racial stereotypes, it is also people from different countries that we tend to stereotype as being more or less aggressive. So why are ethnic and racial stereotypes dangerous? Probably even more dangerous than gender stereotypes. They may lead to tolerance of racist opinions and aggressive behaviour towards young black men in particular. And this is the main reason that Black Lives Matter was founded. And some of you may have only heard about it last year with the incident of George Floyd, but actually it was founded in 2013 because of the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. Basically, Trayvon Martin was murdered, was shot when he was visiting his dad's fiance by someone who was working, who was part of the community, and basically he got sent to prison. But then, after a year, he was released because he said that they said that they couldn't prove that it wasn't self-defense. So it was upholding this negative stereotype of a black young man who was unarmed. And so Black Lives Matter, their mission is to eradicate white supremacy and to build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities, because Trayvon Martin wasn't an isolated incident, unfortunately. Thousands of incidents have happened since then and way before that. Another example of it is in 2014, Michael Brown. You might have heard about him. He was 18 years old and he was shot 12 times and killed by a white police officer. Brown was unarmed. Other incidents in which young black men are killed by police officers have continued since. So this always happens. And why does it happen? It happens because police officers and other people hold strong racist stereotypes of young black men, and this influences their behaviour. So because they associate black men with aggression, violence, threat, gun crime, they have this expectation that that's what they're going to do. And so they expect them to pull out a gun or pull out a knife. So therefore, police get their defence in first, and they're way more likely to resort to armed forces than they would if the similar incident had happened with a white male. So we're finished now. We've looked at conformity to social group norms and stereotypes and aggression. And now, just to finish off, I want you to have a go at these two exam questions. So number one, just a 2-marker, so it won't take you very long at all. Give 2 features of the social approach that can explain aggression. You can talk about anything that we've talked about. So you can talk about cultural knowledge, you can talk about gender knowledge, you can talk about stereotypes. And then this 3-mark question. Phil and Ryan were walking along the street when a man bumped into them and said something threatening. Phil immediately punched the man. After they had run away, Ryan asked Phil why he had been so aggressive. Phil replied, I had to, because he insulted my family. Use one aspect of the social approach to explain Phil's behaviour. So make sure you mention Phil in your answer and obviously describe a key term from the social approach in explaining aggression. Again, you can choose what you write about. You may wish to write about gender norms. I think that fits probably the best. As always, submit your notes onto Teams and let me know if there are any questions.